Okay, today's review video is on Malice by John Gwynne, the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series and the first book that he has published, and he is a very prolific author. I think he has 8 books out now, at least 8 that I know of off the top of my head. We have 7 in the Banished Lands, and then he started a new trilogy with The Shadow of the Gods, and I believe there's a new book coming out this year. So, well-loved author. I have been wanting to read Malice since spring, early summer of 2020, and it's just never happened because I'd been inundated with other very large fantasy book series. Like, if you haven't seen this book in person, it's this big, it's that thick, the font is just normal size, but it's not like that's not that big. They're long books, and I think Malice is one of the shorter ones, so I had to wait till there was space. So I finally got around to reading it, and I read it in 48 hours. I purposely took off Sunday and Monday, and I gave myself time to just read this story, and unfortunately, I had a very mixed experience with this book, as I've already kind of talked about, kind of on Instagram and Friday Reads. You know, I've mentioned it, and I've been trying not to be too negative yet until I had a space for it. Per usual, all books have flaws, even some of my favorites have flaws. It's just for me whether I notice flaws when I read, whether they will annoy me. So when I bring up things that I find negative today, it's totally okay if you didn't find those things to bother you. I think sometimes when you're in an immersed experience, you might not notice things. And I'm really annoyed that I did, because I would have rather had the experience everyone else seems to have while reading this series. So just know that's like where I'm coming from. I am actually going to do this video a little differently from some of my other reviews. As I was planning out the things I wanted to say, I'm going to actually do kind of a alternating pros and cons sort of list. So I can kind of not just talk all negatives at once and all positives at once. We'll go back and forth and end on a positive note sort of thing. So that's what you're going to get in this video. If you do not like to hear critical things about your favorite books, I respect that. Maybe come back later, come to another video of mine. I will say I am still planning on reading Valor and seeing if the things that bother me will improve there. And even if I don't like Valor, I'm going to try his newest trilogy, Shadows of the Gods, because I know some of my friends who didn't like Malice really liked that one. So there's a chance that this could just be like, it's the first book he ever published syndrome for me and this author. So that's the large preamble about what you're going to see here. And so what is this book about? Because honestly, I picked it up and I knew it was multi-POV fantasy, but I hadn't thought about what it's about. And its project, its goal is really a prophecy is about to come to fruition. We're about to start this new God War, and we spend time in this book specifically watching our chosen ones, because there's kind of 2 chosen ones, one for the dark side, one for the light side, kind of grow and develop and come into their own, which I actually really like the project of this book. I kind of wish more books had this premise of not just throwing the chosen one into the quest right away, like getting to watch them grow into their abilities and like get to see them with their families and friends and communities, and like, I don't know, watching the legend become the legend sort of thing is something I actually find pretty interesting. So that is what happens in this book. This book is primarily a huge setup book. You're getting introduced to the world. You can tell there's a turning point in history about to happen, and our main point of views are meant to help us see many facets of the world, and within those main point of views, we have 2 very central storylines that we follow. Now, getting into my first, probably the biggest negative for me, I think, of my list of negatives, is the introduction of these characters. I thought was executed fairly, I don't know, it was rough for me. I would say the first 50 to 100 pages was the roughest for me because of how these characters were introduced, mainly because the motivations of all of these characters felt extremely interchangeable for me for a really long time. They all have issues with needing to prove themselves as men, or wanting to be one of the men, as one of our female characters is like, and also a lot of them have to deal with similar issues. Even though they're on different parts of the continent, they all have to deal with different issues with their fathers. There's different bullying things going on in different levels of society, and because they all had such similar circumstances in that regard and similar motivations for why they are interested in what they're interested and why they make the decisions they make, they kind of blended together for me. I actually knew who was where consistently. I wasn't someone who got bogged down by the number of POVs. Honestly, the map was super helpful because I could be like, okay, you're in this part of the country, you're here, and I had that all settled. But it was kind of boring to me and tricky for me because since they all had very similar motivations, it was hard for me to give each character their own voice and their own vibrancy as like with my imagination. And maybe my imagination was just lazy. But just having, character descriptions, which I'm not very good at keeping in my head anyways, because if someone tells me a character has red hair, I don't think about them with red hair. I think about them in other ways and other characteristic traits, not the visual ones. So I was given visual cues, and I was given these backstories that were all not the same, but very similar. So that was probably my biggest issue. Now, I do think that resolves itself a little bit more as you spend more time with these people and as you go through the book. But that was my biggest complaint jumping into it. Wasn't the number of characters, but how difficult it was to differentiate them. Something that I thought was a positive, though, was how this story set up a lot of intriguing moments for me and how it was set up in general. This isn't groundbreaking, it's a very tropey good time, but the idea that we have a war on the supernatural plane that was coming to get on this continent again, how we have issues that were in the far past that we've forgotten that are coming forward. I love that stuff. I mean, I love the Stormlight Archive. That is very prevalent there. I mean, that's a classic thing in Lord of the Rings. Like, these otherworldly gods and big masses of power suddenly having repercussions in our day-to-day lives on these continents that have largely been recovering from their own issues. I love that setup. So I thought that was a really intriguing premise, and I actually did like its execution for the most part. And I don't know. I think some people might not like these things, but I think when it leaned into the campy parts of the who's on whose side, who's gonna backstab who, and trying to figure out where are these people from, what is their backstory, because I know there's a backstory that I don't know about. Like, there was a lot of, I've read fantasy stories before, and this is for sure wink wink nudging at me, and I'm curious, like, okay, I know it was predictable in that I knew there was an answer to be found there. But I was interested in the answer. So I actually really liked those parts of the book, and I actually liked the payoff of those moments. I thought it was pretty well executed. I actually had very little problems with the plot, except for, I guess this next negative is, like I said at the beginning, we follow kind of roughly 2.5 storylines that get, like, intersected. And for a while, it all kind of felt relatively equal to me. I was as invested in everything. Now, granted, I wasn't super invested in anything, so I was about average. I was average for all of these parts. And then at one point, one of the storylines just, like, got great. And then the other one, I was like, I don't know if I care. I see what you're doing. And I don't know, and I think especially once we get to the end of the story, which the beginning's my weakest, the ending's the second weakest for me, and I think part of that is I didn't like getting the ending that I cared about getting broken up by this other ending that I just didn't care about, like, at all. Like, I had no emotional investment, or like even world-building intrigue investment into this other ending line. So I think that's my second weakest point, is the ending, because it kind of fell into that classic trap of if you have multiple storylines, some of them will probably become less interesting to a reader than others, and for me in particular, I cared about one storyline infinitely more than the other. And that storyline is Corbin's. Corbin is for sure our main character, that he has the most point of views. I mean, I didn't count them, but I'm pretty sure he has the most page time and point of views, and he is the reason I will be reading the next book. I'm curious about his storyline. He is not a character that is new to me. I've seen his character several times in fiction, and I love his character in fiction, so I'm good with it. He has a great animal companion. He's surrounded by a very loving, great community for the most part, except for some issues with bullying. As I had mentioned, there's a lot of bullying in this book. If you do not like bullying, I would not pick up this book, because it's just a lot of injustice and bullying on different levels. Like, you have childhood bullying, and then you have just, like, bigger problems. So I really liked Corbin, and I liked that. So the middle of the book's the strongest for me. I mean, remember, I read this over 48 hours, so I spent a lot of time reading the middle of the book in a short period of time, but it was very cozy watching Corbin grow up, because Corbin, I get to watch him grow up with his family and friends for years and train to be a warrior, as many people do in this world. And I don't know, I liked getting to watch his character grow. And I think he is the reason why, now that we've had this big setup book, I'm excited to get into Valor and see what's the payoff of that? So he's for sure the strongest thing for me. Also, I'm a sucker for an animal companion, like always. But I will say the side characters and a lot of the side point of views that weren't some of our major ones were not as strong for me. And one of them in particular, I think, was an active thing that bothered me. And I know this book was written in 2012, but we had a point of view of his sister. And she's the only female point of view. In a book with like 8 to 10 point of views, she's our only female point of view, which is kind of classic fantasy things. It's a classic fantasy author mistake. Like, even Sanderson has said when he wrote Mistborn, Vin was the only female character point of view. The difference there is Vin was the main character and extremely well fleshed out. Here, we have a very not well fleshed out character who's extremely dry, one note, and classic, I want to be one of the boys, which is fine. Like, I mean, I was a physics major. I was 10% of the female population in my department. I understand wanting to be one of the boys. That was, unfortunately, probably more of my personality than I would have wanted it to be in my early 20s. But it's not amazing character work, and it's very cliche, and how her arc ended up in this book in particular, I did not like. I did not like a lot of the things that happened. I think a lot of the tropes that I didn't like in this book centered around the use of her POV. In general, though, I still want to read the next one. Like I said, everyone who's going to be in the comments and tell me it gets better as you go, this is the weakest, I do know that. Like, my friends have told me, the internet's told me, I get that. I don't think I was prepared for how weak and how egregious some of the flaws would be to me. Like, something I hadn't mentioned yet was the writing style. And this probably is the hardest one for me. And I am someone who is known to like simple, direct writing styles. They are not a negative for me. They are fine. I don't think this writing was bad, but the writing kept being a certain way that I kept getting pulled from the story, and I couldn't figure it out for a really long time. Sometimes it would be transitions, sometimes it would be the exposition or info dumps, sometimes it would be the dialogue. Like, there were a lot of moments where I felt like this is a fleshed out outline, but it doesn't feel like the prose have been honed enough to be like an organic paragraph that I'm used to in fantasy. I don't know if I'm saying that in the way that makes sense. Like, it's not like it was grammatically wrong, it's not like it was egregiously bad, but the way it was written was clunky enough at times that I kept getting pulled from the story. And I think this happened the most at the beginning when he was setting up the setup book. And I think that's where it was the biggest struggle, and I get that, man. Starting anything is always so hard for me. Like, when I have to write, like, I don't write a lot, but like my thesis, like, starting something is hard. I would say that's always the weakest part of any documents I put together. I'm just not used to seeing that when I read books. I normally end up reading very polished manuscripts by the time they get to me. And this one just didn't feel as polished as what I am used to. That said, I have read stuff that is way worse than this and enjoyed it more, and I think part of that is just character immersion and not being distracted by other things. I still don't know where I rate this. I think when I finished it, I was close to 3 stars because I was annoyed, but as I've thought about it, and I've thought about like the cozy moments, it's like 3.5. I don't know. By the time I do my wrap-up later this month, I'll probably have a better idea what I'll rate this. And I kind of maybe wanted to end this section. I'm going to say it's lightly spoilery. It's not. I'm not going to talk about plot moments, but I wanted to talk about the tropes that I liked that were in this book and the tropes that I didn't like that are in this book. And depending on who you are, as a reader, this could be considered spoilery. In my opinion, I don't think they are, because this is just such a trope-heavy classic fantasy. Like, you start reading it, if you have read any major fantasy books, you're going to see them. You haven't even had to read them. Have you played Kingdom Hearts? Have you watched Star Wars? Like, you have been exposed to a lot of the tropes in this book. But I wanted to talk about the ones I liked in case you have similar tastes to me, and ones that I didn't like in case those are also on your like, I don't know yet. So we'll start with the negative and go into the positive to end this video on a positive note. So I have written down the whole female character trying to be part of the guys. Like I said, I don't like that trope when it's done poorly, because I think there's nuance to that discussion. Like, yes, you want to be able to be an individual and not be put into a gender box. That is, honestly, I feel like everyone's gripe in society at any point, depending on where you are in the spectrum. You don't want to be in a box. But that also means you don't forsake the part of yourself that you do still love that might be considered femme. Like, I don't know. I think actually that's handled really well with Vin's character, just bringing it back to her, because I talked about her earlier, and I just don't think it was done well here, and I have no clue if I'll get a chance to see that rectification in future books, but I'll find out. And then a major one, and this is the one where I don't know if it's going to be spoilery for people, but there are several fridged characters, some are women, some are men, that you never grow attached to, but they're just used to help further the plot or further a character development moment, and because I had no emotional investment in those moments, it felt lazy. And that is the moment when I care about if you fridge a character, which if you don't know, fridging is what I described when you kill a character to further the character development of another individual. Typically, it's with male characters getting their motivation behind the loss of a loved one. So this happens, though, multiple times. It's kind of equal opportunist. And every time it was done, I didn't like it. And it happened a couple times. It wasn't my favorite thing. But those are actually, besides all the other negative things I've talked about, my main negative, like, tropes or trends you see in fantasy that this book has. In terms of the positive, I like that we have a very classic good versus evil thing going on. I'm cool with it. I haven't read a story that black and white in a while, and I think it's going to stay that way based off what Alan has said. I love a chosen one. We have 2 chosen ones, so one for the light side, one for the dark side. Like, I like that. I love the ominous presence of this war is coming. It's one of my favorite things. I already mentioned the animal companion. And this story also has, and this is also why I kind of put it here, because it could be, like, spoilery, but I think it's very obvious when you first get introduced to it, mentors that have secret backstories. You know, like, I love good mentorship in books, but I also like when there's, like, okay, I can tell you have a hidden past. Why don't you tell me about that? But that is my review on this book, and I am very conflicted. I mean, part of me wants to dive into Valor sooner rather than later just to, like, know what's going to happen next. And I think that's the biggest positive I can give this book, is that I want to know what'll happen. And honestly, I've spent so much time with Corbin, I, like, want to be with him again. I liked him. There is a cozy quality to this book, even though it's war and death and everything like that. There was a cozy quality that I did enjoy. I think I just had a lot of moments that frustrated me, and I wish just weren't there, because then it could have been, like, for me, a favorite, you know? If you want to leave an emoji, the front of this cover has a huge sword on it, so leave in a sword emoji. Feel free to discuss with me your experience with this book, whether or not you think you want to read it, and no spoilers for the book. I'll have to delete those. If you want to talk spoilers, come find me in the Discord, but otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.